Welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. If you're an agnostic, skeptic, free thinker, rationalist, or even if you're someone's friend who was invited here and you happen to be a believer, you are welcome at Seattle Atheist Church. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear any thing supernatural promoted at the podium. This coronavirus is affecting us all, and we hope that everyone is doing well. The safety and well-being of our members is extremely important, and that is why we are continuing to meet online. So we appreciate you for being here. And now the creed. Seattle Atheist Church was founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics, which commits us on the one hand to reason and evidence-based thinking, and on the other to compassion for our fellow beings. These commitments motivate us to oppose magical and wishful thinking and all forms of dogma, as well as to stand firmly against prejudice. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to other conscious beings. We believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds right to you, then you are probably in the right place. So for today, we have our member Catherine, who's going to give a talk on the neuroscience of politics. Catherine, you have the floor.
I've shared out a Google Doc with stuff in it that may come in handy while I'm talking. If you scroll to the very top of the chat, and if you don't have that open, click on chat at the bottom of your screen to open up the chat screen, and you'll see a web link. You might want to open that now, click on it and open it now, so you'll have it to refer to at particular points. I'll mention it when I'm saying something that's relevant to something that's there. And let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough too, or too loud. I've been asked to start with a little about why, with all the aspects of politics there are to talk about, I've picked brain biology as the one to talk about today. Most of my training has been in the sciences, biology in general for one degree and engineering for another, but I went back to school most recently to get a degree in neurobiology. Because I started becoming consciously aware that lots of people in the world, among other things, that lots of people in the world around me were producing from their minds, and I was producing from my own mind, in some instances, opinions and beliefs that dumbfounded me, including with respect to other people, including producing political beliefs that were opposite to the logic of my own. And now we have a presidential election coming up, and it matters a lot who wins. So I started digging into the research on differences in people's brains that appear to affect their political values and voting. And it affects their political values and voting without their being consciously aware of it. Affects all of us without our being consciously aware of it. So all this research has only been done, actually, or at least been published by neuroscientists within the last 6 years. And it says a lot about how people are likely to vote, but the research isn't being addressed in any of the news on voting behavior that I've been able to find. And that's why I was concerned and wanted to do a talk on this. Now, it's worth mentioning that psychologists over a decade ago, longer than the 6 years ago that neuroscientists glommed onto this, psychologists were thinking a lot about this. And they were actually the first to understand the importance of researching the human unconscious in its effect on voting, or possible effect on voting behavior. And they were specifically asking in their research, what factors in our environment, what are the factors in our environment that we're not conscious of, but that influence how we vote in an election? So some examples, for instance, are, you've probably heard about the research of judges who, that if they pass judgment or they're in court when they've just had a big lunch and they've got a nice full stomach and they're feeling really good, they're much more lenient in the judgments they pass on accused people than if they're in a bad mood for whatever reason. So psychologists have also found out that compared to people with that those who haven't eaten for several hours are more sympathetic to the plight of welfare recipients, probably because they identify with them more. But in all these instances, the judges I've just mentioned, the people who are sympathetic to welfare recipients, and the other examples I'm going to mention, in all of these, if you ask any of these judges, any of these people who are sympathetic, if their current situation had any influence on their judgment of accused people or their judgment of welfare people, they would say absolutely not. I've come to it from a logical decision. And it's absurd to think that something so silly as how full my stomach is could affect my perception of this issue. So other examples are, they found that Americans whose polling place happens to be in a church are more likely to vote for right of center candidates and ideas than those whose polling place is in a public school. People are more likely to accept the realities of global warming if their air conditioning is broken. People shown a cartoon happy face for just a few milliseconds, which is too quick to register consciously, list fewer arguments against immigration than those individuals who were shown a frowning cartoon face right before they were asked about immigration. Something as silly as being shown a cartoon face. Political views are influenced not only by forces believed to be irrelevant, but by forces that haven't entered into conscious awareness. And that's the point of all this. Specifically, something that concerns me about the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic right now is that at least one study has found, well, actually it's multiple studies, but I have one of them in the shared doc that I put on. You have to scroll down to almost halfway down or farther to the abstracts are numbered, and it's number 7 that gives one of the examples of a study where they found that when a people is in the middle of when the country's in the middle of a war or other highly stressful situation, they are more likely to support authoritarian leaders, including voting for authoritarian leaders, than when they have the exact same candidates and they're not in a stressful situation. So this isn't all bad news. There are things that can be done to affect, to counter that. But it's something that needs, it's a tendency in human beings that needs to be attended to, relevant to this election, I think. And it's important to remember that these unconscious proclivities have been found to be true of both liberals and conservatives, not just one party or the other, both liberals and conservatives, and to everyone in between. And most, of course, most that political views are, roughly on a continuum, and most voters are in between the extremely liberal and the extremely conservative, and all are affected by these unconscious factors. So let's see. So here are some of the ways that, and I also want to mention this is on average. Here are some of the types of images that have been shown to affect have been shown to produce some enlightenment on people's political views. And actually, this one of them I'm going to have to show you on the screen. I don't know if it's visible because I don't have an electronic copy of it. There are 4 photographs. 3 of them are very negative, some almost disgusting. One of them is a lesion, a sore or lesion between 2 toes, and another is insects crawling on something. And but the 4th one in the upper, let's see, it's in the upper left or upper right. This one is a neutral one. So subjects were given, both liberals and conservatives, both negative and positive images of this sort to look at, and then see how differently the conservatives responded to it versus the liberals. And another image that I won't show you, but that I'll just describe, that is very little, is a picture that was used in a lot of the studies, is a picture of a man about to put live maggots into his mouth. He was getting ready to eat worms. And so that's a picture, for instance, that's clearly pretty disgusting. What was being tested in this instance was by looking at the brains, as to who was reacting the most negatively to it. So let's see, and scientists have also measured skin conductance to measure how strongly some people were reacting to that, as well as eye tracking, because they found that actually the conservatives showed a shorter time to being fixated on something that was negative, and their eyes dwelled on it longer, something negative in a picture. And skin conductance went up more for liberals rather than conservatives. So I'm going to read out this broad generalization of what characterizes someone who's conservative, who's way over on the right-hand side, and broad generalizations of what characterizes people who are way on the left. But that table of conservatives versus liberal is also in your shared doc, and that table is pretty near the top. So is there anyone that doesn't have the doc open that wants me to read off the broad generalizations? I mean, I can't tell. In any event, the conservatives, as a broad generalization, tend to be pro-gun, anti-abortion, anti-homosexuality, pro-war and military funding. They have a strict father worldview. They're pro anything that increases physical safety. They're vigilant for possible under-the-radar threats. They have a high valuation, higher than for liberals, for tradition. They have a strong in-group identity and protectiveness of that in-group. They tend to be more strongly religious, and they have a strong need to avoid ambiguity. And liberals, almost at the opposite of that, are pro-choice and anti-gun, anti-war, generally anti-military, pro-gay, pro-homosexuality, pro-gay marriage, pro-transsexual rights. They have a nurturing parent sort of worldview. They value tolerance to ambiguity. Tolerance to ambiguity is considered to be a good thing by liberals rather than by conservatives. And liberals value novel experiences. Liberals think it's a good thing. Conservatives, not so much. So the common thread for all of this is what psychologists call negative bias. And there at the top of the shared doc is Wikipedia's definition of shared bias, which gives you lots of examples of it too, of ones that are, including ones that are pretty much already accepted in our society. And the thing to be aware of is that psychologists and neuroscientists have found out that negative bias is true of both liberals and conservatives. It's just that conservatives tend to have a stronger negative bias. When we look at their brains and we look at the way that they answer questionnaires for psychologists and things, it becomes clear that they have stronger feelings about this, about things about negative sorts of things than liberals do. And you can see from the broad generalizations about conservatives as that's true. Now, I came across one study, which I think is also in the group of abstracts that are there, and I can't remember which number, but it found there's one study for which Jordan Peterson was one of the 5 researchers. So I don't know how trustworthy it is, but this study studied conservatives versus liberals, and found that along with all the other studies, conservatives do have a stronger negative bias, but also that conservatives have a stronger positive bias than liberals do. That I guess the extreme of something they don't differ on neutral stuff, but on stuff that's definitely negative and definitely positive, they react more strongly than we do. And it might be, now, if that's, I haven't researched, so I don't know how much that study has been, how often it's been reproduced by other researchers, or whether they found contradictory information or whatever. So your guess is as good as mine. But it occurred to me in reading the study that if that's true, that may be why conservatives for a long time have tested as happier on psychological tests than liberals have. And I'm assuming that's because conservatives value kind of black and white ways of looking at things, that value religiosity. They've found for a long time that prayer does a lot to lower your blood pressure. It has, if you believe in prayer, you get some physiological benefits from that you don't if you don't believe in prayer and don't do it. Now, maybe you just get the same for meditation. I don't know. I haven't researched it. But ambiguity tends to make some people feel less secure in themselves. And and liberals tolerate ambiguity, whereas conservatives just they refuse to have it be part of their worldview. So that's for whatever it's worth. So what neuroscience have done, based on or picking up on the research that psychologists have done on negative bias and finding differences between liberals and conservatives, is that they have asked the question of what factors in our neurophysiology, what factors in the chemistry, the metabolism in our brains, and the anatomy in our brains might explain the negative bias and its influence on how we vote, particularly unconscious things. I don't have a picture of functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's a type of image of looking inside the brain, as is electroencephalography. But these are the tools that neuroscientists often use, and they've used them to look at specific parts of the brain, to look at the whole brain and find out which parts of the brain react most strongly, or which parts of the brain light up when they're shown the positive and negative and neutral images that I showed you. And this is after separating subjects into liberals and conservatives, so they could measure actually in difference of degree of responding to it. And in the shared doc, if you scroll, I think, about a third of the way down, you'll start seeing pictures of parts of the brain. Most of these are lateral cuts of the methods of parts of the brain that they've looked at specifically that behave differently in response to a strong negative photograph than liberals' brains respond to when exposed to the same photograph. So it's the same parts of the brain for both liberals and conservatives, but they show a stronger response. And specifically, it's more blood flow. That's how they measure activity, how active your brain is, or how strongly something has gotten your attention, or how strong your feelings are about something, is by an increase in blood flow in those parts. And the sympathetic nervous system is part of the nervous system as well, even though it's outside the brain. So the diagram of the sympathetic nervous system gives some other parts of the body that respond to this too, as well as the last image is skin conductance is another test for it, because skin conductance measures whether or not your heart rate has increased, measures indirectly whether your heart rate is increased, and other things that I don't know much about. That's the extent that I know, but that there's a differential skin conductance response between liberals and conservatives. So we're used to thinking of physical traits as hardwired, like eye color. But if it seems like a bit of a stretch to picture something non-physical, such as behavior, and specifically such as political behavior, as even partly hardwired, think of all the other aspects of human behavior that we do accept now, because there have been more and more studies on it. We do accept now as being at least partly hardwired. Sexual orientation is a behavior. Left and right-handedness is a behavior. Depression is, schizophrenia is, and happiness set point is a behavior. It's something that's shown, it's something that we accept as being at least partly innate, that expresses itself with behavior. And this is just some of the things that are at least partly hardwired. You all can probably think of others, and I hope you'll bring them up in the discussion after this. But so there is some good news in all this about the differences between liberals and conservatives. And one is that if you're not going to spend time trying to convert someone who's left-handed to be right-handed, then don't spend time trying to convert a diehard of the opposite political persuasion to your side. You'll have more influence on their voting behavior actually by exploring, and this is from other studies that I haven't mentioned yet, by exploring the interests unrelated to politics that you have in common with those sorts of people, like fishing or sports or crochet or I don't know what. And that's because people become less knee-jerk in their reactions to something about the other side of the political spectrum when they've established bonds with someone personally who's on the other side, establish bonds that have nothing to do with their politics. And also, there are lots of people, if completely forgetting about anyone at either extreme of the political spectrum, there are lots of people who are questioning and on the fence and who are influenceable with respect to how voting in the next election. And the problem with them is how to find them. They're not nearly as vocal as people on either extreme, and they're not sought out by the media because of that. But they might make themselves visible to those of us who are open about the things that we ourselves are on. If we're open to other people about the things that we're on the fence about, they're more likely to be open to us about the stuff that they're on the fence about. And one really interesting study that I came across found that fact-checking works. That's the moral of that study. They found that fact-checking, say if you send to a friend of the opposite political spectrum a list with documentation of fact checks that have been done on their candidate, that does influence they'll accept that. But only if it's the type of fact checking that is not trying so hard to be right in the middle, to come right in the middle of the political spectrum, that it lists that it gives a list of 5 things that were lies that the particular candidate gave, and then a list of 5 things that they said that were true, as if the two balanced each other. It's only a list of the things that the particular candidate said that are lies that will make people consciously aware that we have a right to expect no lies. We have a right to expect no lies from our candidates. It's worth, at the same time, it's worth asking ourselves, when we read or see something on the opposite side of the aisle, to ask ourselves to apply the same questions, the same criticalness in our minds to what we most recently read from our own side. So here's an example from my own bias of not taking this advice: the sexual harassment accusations against Joe Biden, who represents my party for the presidency. I welcomed any reporting I came across that supported Biden and discredited the woman who accused him. I did not do the same with the sexual harassment accusations against Kavanaugh when he was being, up for nomination to the Supreme Court. So all I can make claim to is that I've pondered over that. That's as far as I've gotten. And so in conclusion, I want to leave you with just one statistic that I think encapsulates all of this, everything that I've talked about. And that is 34% nature versus 66% nurture. Keep in mind that researchers have a great deal more to find out about this, of what's innate and what isn't. But from what they've found out so far, our political views are about 34% nature or hardwiring or genes, and about 66% nurture or environment or life experiences. So the next time you find yourself scratching your head over something that seems totally bizarre that the other side has espoused, ask yourself if the 34 versus 66 might have something to do with it. Thanks, and I hope this stimulates a lot of discussion. I'm done.
Thank you, Catherine. Can everyone give her a round of applause, please? Reaction. Nice. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
That's great. All right. Well, now it's our tradition to gather in our circle for a group discussion. We'll be turning off the recording now. Let me actually do that.